The autumn afternoon draped Los Angeles in a golden haze on October 22, 2024, as a gentle breeze swept through Hollywood Boulevard, scattering amber leaves across the cracked pavement. The street, once a glittering artery of dreams, now wore a quieter charm. Tourists snapped photos of faded stars on the Walk of Fame, while locals shuffled past with weary familiarity. Near a small, weathered theater, a modest crowd trickled out from a matinee screening of Eastwood, A Legacy in Frames, a short documentary tracing Clint Eastwood's towering career. The faint hum of applause lingered in the air as the marquee flickered, casting a soft glow over the scene. Across the street, Clint Eastwood himself sat at an outdoor table of a modest cafe, unnoticed by most. At 94, his features had softened with timelines etched deep around his eyes and mouth, but his presence remained magnetic. He wore a worn leather jacket, a gray fedora tipped low to shield his face from the sun, and a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose as he thumbed through a script. The pages were marked with his scrawled notes, a potential final project he was mulling over directing. Passers-by occasionally slowed, whispering his name in hushed tones, but none dared approach. Clint preferred it that way. Solitude was his refuge, a chance to think without the weight of his legend pressing in. A block away, unnoticed by the cafe's patrons, Jack Riley stood beneath a flickering street lamp, clutching a piece of cardboard scrawled with shaky letters. "Please help. Once a storyteller." At 42, Jack was a shadow of the man he'd been. His denim jacket hung loose on his gaunt frame, patched together with duct tape, and his dark hair fell in greasy tangles over his forehead. Dirt streaked his hands, but his eyes, a piercing hazel, held a flicker of something unbroken. 3 months on the streets had worn him thin, his last meal a half-eaten sandwich scavenged from a dumpster. Once, he'd been a screenwriter with a spark of promise. Now, he was just another invisible figure in Hollywood's margins. Jack's gaze drifted to Clint, recognition sparking like a match in the dark. He'd seen that face on posters, studied those films in late-night reruns when he still had a roof over his head. Clint Eastwood, the man whose gritty tales had fueled Jack's own dreams of telling stories. His stomach growled, a sharp reminder of his hunger, and he hesitated, shifting his weight from one worn sneaker to the other. "What's a guy like that care about me?" he thought, pride warring with desperation, but the ache in his gut won out. Swallowing hard, he crossed the street, each step a battle against the shame clawing at him. He stopped at Clint's table, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Sir, can you spare $1?" Clint looked up slowly, his glasses glinting in the fading light, and Jack braced himself for the rejection he knew too well. Clint Eastwood slipped his glasses off, letting them dangle from his fingers as he studied Jack Riley with a gaze that pierced through the layers of grime and hesitation. The cafe's hum faded into the background, the clink of cups, the murmur of nearby patrons, all drowned out by the weight of that look. Jack shifted uncomfortably, his cardboard sign trembling slightly in his grip. He'd expected a quick dismissal, maybe a crumpled bill tossed his way if he was lucky. But Clint leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly, and gestured to the seat across from him. $1, huh?" he said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying that familiar drawl from 100 films. "Sit down. Tell me something instead." Jack blinked, caught off guard. The invitation felt like a mirage too good, too strange to be real. He scanned Clint's face for a hint of mockery, but there was none, just a calm curiosity that pinned him in place. "You? Serious?" he asked, his voice cracking from disuse. Clint nodded once, a small tilt of his head, and Jack hesitated only a moment longer before easing into the chair. The metal was cold against his thin jeans, and he set the sign face down on the table, angling it away from prying eyes. Up close, Clint's presence was overwhelming, not intimidating. Exactly, but steady, like a mountain weathered but unyielding. Jack's hands fidgeted, nails bitten to the quick, and he muttered a shaky, "Thanks." "Don't thank me yet," Clint said, folding his arms. "I don't hand out dollars for free. What's your story, kid?" The word kid landed oddly. Jack was 42, though the streets had aged him beyond his years, but it carried no condescension, just a nudge to keep talking. Jack swallowed, his throat dry as sandpaper. He wasn't used to this people looking at him, really looking, instead of through him. Most tossed him coins or hurried past, their eyes sliding away like he was a stain on the sidewalk. But Clint waited, patient, and the silence stretched until Jack couldn't bear it. I'm Jack," he started, his voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. "Jack Riley. I don't usually, I hate asking. It's just been rough lately." He glanced down, ashamed of the tremble in his words, but Clint's steady gaze pulled him back. "Rough how?" Clint pressed, not unkindly. His tone was firm, like he wasn't here for half-truths. Jack took a deep breath, the dam inside him cracking. "I used to write," he said, the confession spilling out before he could stop it. "Scripts, for movies. Small stuff indies mostly. Had a little place in Burbank, a crew of buddies I worked with. Even got close to selling a big one once." His eyes flickered with a ghost of pride, then dimmed. "It was about an old soldier, guy who'd seen too much, trying to find peace in a world that didn't care. Thought it'd be my break." He paused, picking at a frayed thread on his sleeve. "Then it all went to hell." Clint leaned forward slightly, resting an elbow on the table. "What happened?" Jack's laugh was bitter, brittle. "Life, I guess. My mom got sick cancer. Took care of her till the end, but the bills piled up. Started drinking to cope. Lost focus. The script fell through, my agent dropped me, and the bottle got me evicted. Been on the street 3 months now." He shrugged, a helpless gesture. "Funny, right? Spent years writing about broken people, and now I'm one of them." Clint didn't laugh. His face stayed calm, but his eyes softened, a faint crease forming at their corners. "You still write?" he asked, nodding toward the bulge in Jack's jacket pocket, a battered notebook Jack hadn't meant to reveal. Jack's hand instinctively covered it, protective. "Yeah, sometimes, when I can find a pen that works. Just ideas. Keeps me sane, I guess." He hesitated, then pulled the notebook out, its cover stained and curling at the edges. "Got this one I've been messing with. About people like me, forgotten folks, who find a way back through telling stories. Dumb, probably. Let me see," Clint said, more command than request. Jack froze, his heart thudding, showing it felt like baring his soul to a stranger, a legend, no less. What if Clint thought it was trash? But those eyes, steady and expectant, left no room for retreat. With trembling fingers, Jack slid the notebook across the table, open to a page scrawled with jagged handwriting. Clint took it, flipping through slowly, his expression unreadable. Jack watched, breath held, as the man who'd shaped his dreams years ago traced lines he'd scratched out in despair. The cafe seemed to hold its breath with him. A waitress paused mid-step, glancing over with a mix of curiosity and caution, as if sensing something rare unfolding. A couple at the next table lowered their voices, their heads tilting toward the odd pair. Clint in his weathered jacket, Jack in his tattered layers. The sun dipped lower, painting the street in hues of orange and shadow, and still Clint read, silent. Jack's stomach twisted. He's gonna laugh, he thought, or worse nothing. Just hand it back and walk away. Finally, Clint set the notebook down, his fingers lingering on the page. "You've got something here," he said, his voice low but deliberate. "Raw, messy, but something." Jack blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "What did you do with that soldier script?" Clint asked, leaning back again. "Lost it," Jack admitted, his voice small. "Left it in the apartment when they kicked me out. Landlord probably trashed it. Clint nodded, like he'd expected that. Shame. Sounded like it had guts. He tapped the notebook lightly. This one does too. You ever think about finishing it? Jack stared, floored. Finish it? I don't even have a place to sleep, let alone a typewriter. It's just scribbles. Scribbles start somewhere, Clint said, his tone matter-of-fact. Every film I've made began with a mess of ink. He paused, studying Jack again, and Jack felt exposed, like Clint could see the kid who'd once stayed up all night rewriting scenes, dreaming of a director's chair. Why'd you stop? Didn't stop, Jack shot back, sharper than he meant. Life stopped me. He regretted it instantly, expecting Clint to bristle, but the old man just raised an eyebrow, an invitation to keep going. Jack sighed, deflating. I wanted to be like you know? Directing, telling stories that hit hard. Watched Unforgiven 100 times, thought I could do that someday. But dreams don't pay rent. Clint's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. They don't, he agreed, but they keep you breathing. He slid the notebook back to Jack, who clutched it like a lifeline. You've got a spark, Jack. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Jack didn't have an answer. The question hung there, heavy, as the breeze picked up, rustling the pages of Clint's script on the table. A shadow crossed Jack's face down, fear, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to argue, to say Clint didn't get it, but those eyes held him fast, daring him to look deeper. The waitress approached then, breaking the spell, offering coffee refills. Clint waved her off, but Jack caught her glance linger on him, not with pity, but something closer to respect. It threw him. What did she see that he didn't? Clint watched him wrestle with it, silent, waiting. And in that silence, Jack felt the first crack of possibility, like a door he'd thought, bolted shut, might still swing open. The cafe's golden light dimmed as the sun sank below Hollywood's skyline, casting long shadows across the table where Clint Eastwood and Jack Riley sat. Jack's notebook lay between them, its pages still fluttering faintly in the cooling breeze. Clint's words, "What are you gonna do with it?" echoed in Jack's ears, a challenge he couldn't shake. He clutched the notebook tighter, his knuckles whitening, and met Clint's gaze. Those eyes, sharp as ever despite the years, held no judgment, just a quiet intensity that made Jack feel seen in a way he hadn't been in ages. He wanted to respond, to prove he wasn't just some washed-up dreamer, but doubt gnawed at him. Why was Clint even asking? What did a legend like him care about a nobody like Jack? Why are you doing this? Jack blurted, his voice raw with a mix of hope and suspicion. You don't know me. I'm just some guy begging for a buck. Why bother? Clint leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his fedora casting a shadow over his face. For a moment, he was silent, and Jack braced himself for a polite brush-off. But then Clint spoke, his voice low and deliberate, like he was pulling a memory from deep within. Back in '55, I was nobody, he said, his eyes drifting past Jack to some distant point. Scraping by, hauling crates at a lumberyard, dreaming about a shot I didn't think I'd get. One day, a guy an assistant director saw me hanging around a studio lot. Gave me a walk-on part in Rawhide. No lines. Just standing there, but it was enough. Someone took a chance on me when I was too broke to see it myself. Jack stared, the weight of Clint's words sinking in. The man who'd built an empire of grit and glory had once been like him? Hungry, uncertain, clinging to a thread of hope? Clint's gaze snapped back to him, piercing again. I see that same hunger in you, Jack. The stories in that notebook, they're not dead. You are. The bluntness hit Jack like a slap, but before he could protest, Clint reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain business card. He slid it across the table with a flick of his wrist. Take this, he said, his tone firm but not harsh. Guy's name is Tom Hargrove. Runs a small production outfit indies, like you used to do. Tell him I sent you. Show him that script. Rest is on you." Jack's breath caught. He stared at the card, its crisp edges stark against the chipped tabletop. "You're serious?" he stammered, his voice cracking. Why would he listen to me? "He won't," Clint said, leaning back. "Not unless you make him. I'm not handing you a job. Kid, I'm handing you a shot. Don't waste it." His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of a smile breaking through. "I don't believe in you yet. I believe in what you could be." Jack's hand hovered over the card, trembling. A shot, from Clint Eastwood. It was too much, too real, and it cracked something open inside him, a flood of fear and fragile hope he couldn't hold back. The cafe lights twinkled faintly as night settled over Hollywood Boulevard, the air turning crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. Jack Riley stood a few steps from Clint Eastwood's table, the business card clutched in his hand like a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. Clint slipped his fedora back on, gave him a small nod more acknowledgement than farewell, and returned to his script, the pages rustling under his fingers. "Good luck, Jack," he said, his voice a quiet rumble before the world seemed to close around him again, leaving Jack alone with his racing thoughts. He stumbled away, the card's edges digging into his palm, and disappeared into the neon-lit streets, a storm of doubt and possibility churning inside him. Clint sat there a while longer, the cafe emptying out as the evening deepened. He didn't look up when Jack left, but his hand paused over the script, a faint tightness in his jaw betraying the flicker of memory Jack had stirred. He'd meant what he said, about chances, about hunger. Decades ago, that assistant director's gamble had lit a spark in him, one that burned through years of struggle to build the life he had now. Helping Jack wasn't charity. It was a debt repaid, a quiet nod to the ghosts of his own past. He scribbled a note in the script's margin. Find the ones who've slipped through, then closed it, his mind already shifting back to the work ahead. For Jack, the days that followed were a blur of small, shaky steps. He clutched that card through nights on a park bench, its ink smudging from his sweaty grip. Finally, hunger and a whisper of Clint's voice drove him to Tom Hargrove's office, a cramped loft above a pawn shop. Tom, a wiry man with a smoker's rasp, eyed Jack's ragged appearance skeptically until he dropped Clint's name. That got him a raised eyebrow and a gruff, "Show me what you've got." Jack handed over his notebook, heart pounding, and waited as Tom flipped through it, muttering under his breath. It wasn't a yes, not yet, but Tom tossed him a mop and said, "Start here. Clean the place. We'll talk scripts later." It was grunt work, but it was a foot in the door. Months later, on a rainy October evening in 2025, Jack stood in the back of a tiny theater, watching shadows flicker across a screen. His film a short about a street performer weaving tailies to reclaim his life played to a sparse crowd. It wasn't grand, just 15 minutes born from his battered notebook, but the credits rolled with written by Jack Riley, and that was enough. He'd clawed his way up mopping floors, pitching ideas, proving himself. Somewhere across town, Clint opened a local paper, saw a blurb about the screening, and allowed himself a rare, fleeting smile. Jack's spark had caught. Jack never forgot that afternoon with Clint. It wasn't just a chance, it was a mirror, showing him he could still write his own ending.